dad. My dad was with me, and the first half of the night he was like really proud of me.
And your dad, of course, I'll just point out, in case anyone doesn't know, is John Voight.
Yeah.
And
he was there for his own nomination.
Right,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, it was really neat. And yeah, so in the beginning of the night he was really proud, and then after, you know, I started downing tequila, he was like, "Oh, do you think that's a good idea?" And then he left.
The rain fell in relentless sheets over Washington, D.C., pooling in uneven rivulets along the asphalt roads, the glow of streetlights casting elongated shadows. Beneath the surface, buried within the fortified corridors of Langley, Nathan Crowley sat in the dim glow of a single overhead light, his fingers pressing against the thick folder on the steel table before him. The words Directive 77X, Undisclosed Asset, were stamped in bold along the top, but it was the name inside that had turned the air in the room heavy with something unspoken. Angelina Jolie. Nathan Crowley's breath slowed as he traced his gaze along the first page. The ink felt darker somehow, the words etched into the paper with a finality that suggested they had never meant to be read again. The file was thin, too thin for what it contained. The pages detailed classified operations, missions embedded within, high-risk territories, orchestrated under the guise of humanitarian efforts. The realization sat like lead in his stomach. Angelina Jolie had not merely been an informant or an asset. She had been an operative. Nathan Crowley scanned the locations listed: Beirut, Istanbul, Kyiv. Each name carried a memory, a fracture in the fabric of global diplomacy that had sent shockwaves through intelligence circles. But these events had never been attributed to an independent agent, let alone someone whose face was recognized across continents. The reports were clinical, stripped of emotion, yet Nathan Crowley could feel the weight behind every action described. The extraction of a high-value target in Istanbul, the retrieval of stolen encryption keys in Hong Kong, the neutralization of an embedded operative in Ukraine, each mission executed with precision, each one tied to Angelina Jolie. Nathan Crowley's fingers curled slightly over the edge of the document as he turned to the next page. The deeper he read, the more the unease clawed its way up his spine. If these reports were accurate, Angelina Jolie had been operating off-book for over a decade, executing missions with a level of autonomy that most field agents would never be granted. There were no official orders logged under her name, no known handlers, no trace of approval from the agency. Angelina Jolie had been answering to someone beyond CIA jurisdiction. The chamber door hissed open behind him, but Nathan Crowley didn't look up immediately. The sound of boots against the floor was familiar, the measured steps deliberate. Silas. Vance stepped forward, the weight of his presence filling the already suffocating space. He didn't need to speak for Nathan Crowley to understand what his arrival meant. If Vance was here, then Nathan Crowley had seen something that was never meant to resurface. Silas Vance placed another folder on the table beside the first. This one was thinner, but somehow more ominous. The top sheet contained grainy surveillance images, blurred figures caught in motion. Nathan Crowley exhaled sharply when he saw her face. Angelina Jolie, captured in fragmented moments across different continents, always appearing just outside the periphery of known intelligence operations. Nathan Crowley shifted his gaze toward Silas Vance, but the other man remained still, his silence pressing against the walls. Nathan Crowley turned another page, his pulse slowing as he absorbed the information. If Angelina Jolie had been retired from active status, these images wouldn't exist. If she had been decommissioned, there should be no record of her presence in high-risk zones. But here she was, moving through conflict-heavy territories as if she had never stopped. Nathan Crowley tapped his fingers against the steel table, forcing his thoughts into order. The implications were staggering. If Angelina Jolie was still active, it meant one of two things. Either she had gone rogue, or she had been given clearance to operate under a directive so classified that even the highest levels of the agency had been kept in the dark. Nathan Crowley inhaled deeply, his mind dissecting the possibilities. Angelina Jolie's last documented presence had been in Kyiv, weeks before a major intelligence breach. The agency had never identified the source of the leak, but now a chilling thought settled in his mind. What if Angelina Jolie had been there, not as a bystander, but as a participant? Silas Vance finally spoke, his voice quiet but weighted. There was no need for unnecessary words. He only gave Nathan Crowley the information that mattered. Angelina Jolie had surfaced in classified intelligence. Chatter. Angelina Jolie had been sighted near a compromised CIA operation. Angelina Jolie was still moving in the world's deadliest corridors, and no one knew why. Nathan Crowley leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his jaw. The room had grown colder, the realization sinking deeper. If the agency wasn't controlling Angelina Jolie anymore, then someone else was. Or worse, Angelina Jolie was controlling them. Nathan Crowley kept his grip tight on the file, his mind racing as he studied the surveillance images. Every blurred photo told the same story. Angelina Jolie was still moving, still operating in the world's darkest corridors, still a ghost, where no ghost should be. The realization settled deep, an unease that coiled tighter with each passing second. If Angelina Jolie had been meant to disappear, the agency had failed. If Angelina Jolie had been deemed a liability, then someone had allowed her to keep running. Nathan Crowley glanced at Silas Vance, but the man's expression remained unreadable. The silence between them stretched long, the weight of the moment pressing into the room. If Angelina Jolie had been under an official directive, then this file wouldn't exist. If Angelina Jolie had been sanctioned by the agency, Nathan Crowley wouldn't be looking at evidence of her actions in places she should never have been. Every record pointed to the same disturbing conclusion. Angelina Jolie wasn't under CIA jurisdiction anymore. Nathan Crowley turned another page, his eyes catching on the timestamps. The most recent image was only weeks old, captured in a restricted zone near a diplomatic breach. The agency had flagged the incident, but no names had been released. Yet here was the proof, buried in classified reports. Angelina Jolie had been there. Nathan Crowley felt the tension in his jaw as he exhaled slowly. If Angelina Jolie was still active, then it meant something much worse. Either Angelina Jolie had broken from control, or Angelina Jolie had been given permission to exist outside it. Nathan Crowley pushed the file aside and straightened in his chair. Silas Vance didn't move, didn't speak, only watched as Nathan Crowley let the implications settle. If Angelina Jolie was no longer under orders, then someone was hunting her. If Angelina Jolie was still operating, then Nathan Crowley barely had time to process the weight of the file before the lights in the chamber flickered. A low hum passed through the walls, the unmistakable sound of an external override. He pushed the folder aside and rose from his chair just as the emergency lights kicked in, washing the room in a deep red glow. Silas Vance shifted his stance, his hand already hovering near his sidearm. The disruption wasn't accidental. Angelina Jolie's name had surfaced where it shouldn't have, and now the agency was responding. Nathan Crowley took a slow step back, his mind assembling the pieces. If Angelina Jolie had truly gone rogue, then the agency wouldn't be handling this delicately. If Angelina Jolie was still operational under someone else's command, then this blackout meant only one thing: damage control. A file like this wasn't supposed to exist, and anyone who had seen it was now a liability. Nathan Crowley turned toward the door, but before he could move, the security locks engaged. The heavy clang of metal reinforced the reality of the situation. Angelina Jolie's name alone had been enough to trigger a lockdown. Silas Vance didn't hesitate. He stepped toward the table, grabbed the file, and ripped the classified pages from their binding. Nathan Crowley knew what that meant. If Angelina Jolie was still being watched, then Angelina Jolie was still considered a threat. If Angelina Jolie had truly severed ties, then the agency was about to ensure that no one followed her trail. Nathan Crowley clenched his fists as he heard the sound of approaching footsteps beyond the door. If Angelina Jolie was still out there, moving in the shadows, then whatever mission she was on hadn't ended. If Angelina Jolie was still running, then someone had given her a reason to stay hidden. If Angelina Jolie was still pulling the strings, then Nathan Crowley had just placed himself in the middle of something far bigger than he had ever anticipated. The agency wasn't just trying to erase the file. The agency was trying to erase her. Nathan. Crowley moved before the door fully unsealed, his instincts driving him forward. The agency wasn't giving him time to think. Angelina Jolie's name had been enough to turn him from an analyst into a target. If the lockdown had been triggered by his access to the file, then the response would be swift and absolute. If Angelina Jolie's records were being erased, then so was anyone who had seen them. Nathan Crowley pressed his back against the cold wall, his mind calculating the few possible exits. Silas Vance was already moving, slipping through the opening before the security overrides engaged again. If Angelina Jolie was still operational, then this was proof that she wasn't supposed to be. If Angelina Jolie had truly gone dark, then she was being hunted. Nathan Crowley followed, keeping low as they slipped past the first security checkpoint. If Angelina Jolie had been under orders, the agency wouldn't be this desperate to erase her existence. The operations listed in the file weren't just covert, they were impossible. If Angelina Jolie had really been embedded in those missions, then she had been playing a role far beyond what even deep cover agents were capable of. Nathan Crowley clenched his fists as he reached the emergency stairwell. If Angelina Jolie was still out there, she wasn't just hiding. She was preparing for something. If Angelina Jolie had left a trail, then it wasn't by accident. The agency was afraid, not just of what she had done, but of what she still planned to do. Nathan Crowley took one last look at the burning file remnants left behind. If Angelina Jolie had truly become a ghost, then the agency had made the mistake of fearing her too late.